Just when we thought the curse of 2016 had delivered its final sting with the announced death of Status Quo's Rick Parfitt on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day managed to deliver yet another shock to our system with the death of George Michael at his home in Oxfordshire. My guest this morning has penned an article for his Peter Tatchell Foundation website and also the Pink Paper, in which he starts by saying, "Anyone who remembers George Michael solely for his music is missing the real importance of him." He is, of course, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Peter, grateful for you to join us this morning. And you first met George before he was famous in and around 1980.
That's right. He was still a teenager and I wasn't that much older. It was some years before he was famous. It was a chance encounter in a very small suburban gay disco above a pub by Manor House Tube Station in North London. We just had a brief conversation. He was a great dancer and he sang along to a lot of the pop hits that were being played by the DJ. I could hear that he had a very good voice. In the conversation, I asked him what he did and what he was planning to do, and he said that he was going to be a pop star. He didn't say he wanted to be a pop star, he said he was going to be a pop star. And I thought to myself, well, maybe, I was a bit sceptical, to be honest, even though I recognised he had a pretty good voice. So imagine my surprise and delight when about 3 years later he had that huge hit with Wham. I thought, George, you were right, my scepticism was misplaced.
And along with Wham, he sort of defined music for us in the 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, he had that sort of particular genre of what a lot of people would dismiss as bubblegum, happy-go-lucky sort of carnival, happy holiday sort of type music, which is fine. But there was also a very serious side to George as well, and a lot of people forget some of his more serious, thoughtful, cerebral tracks, like Praying for Time, which was released in 1990, which was a really beautiful track, and was really a lament about the state of the world. What I found really interesting is that George did not appear in that video. In fact, the video didn't include any dancers or anything like that. It was just a plain black background with the lyrics on the screen. I think it showed that George wanted his fans to focus on the message.
And famously, some might even say stubbornly, he refused to come out until that infamous arrest in the LA toilet in 1998. But we forget what the atmosphere was like for gay men in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of hostility.
That's right. Well, there were a few pop stars who were already out. There'd be people like Boy George and Jimmy Somerville. But George chose not to reveal that he was gay because he said he feared a negative reaction from his parents, fans, the record company, and particularly the tabloid press. And you've got to remember that in those days, the Red Tops were very, very anti-gay, very strongly homophobic. They would depict being gay as something that was scandalous and shameful. And he saw how many gay public figures were damaged, even ruined, by tabloid smears and slurs about their sexuality. Plus, this was also the era of AIDS. AIDS was in those days dubbed by some politicians and, again, tabloid newspapers as, quote, the gay plague. Gay men were being demonized and scapegoated for this deadly, fatal virus. So in that atmosphere, public attitudes became much more homophobic. There was a big rise in gay-bashing attacks and even murders. A big spike in the arrest of gay men by the police. It was a pretty fearful time to be gay, let alone openly gay, as a public figure. So I, wish he'd come out then to challenge that prejudice, but I can understand why he didn't.
And what do you think of this campaign by The Sun to get Careless Whisper re-released? A paper, I think it's safe to say, not very much liked by George Michael.
Well, yes, what an irony how history turns. I mean, The Sun was, in the 1980s, one of the most homophobic of all the papers. And it outed people without any public interest justification. It depicted gay people as scandalous and shameful. It was a very nasty, bigoted paper. But times have moved on, and I think, one needs to, recognise that the Sun perhaps is now trying to make amends, and good on them. I think we should always hold out the hand of forgiveness and redemption. So the fact the Sun is now bigging up George Michael, it may have leave a bittersweet taste in some people's mouths, but I think it's a positive thing to go from being so homophobic to now being broadly gay supportive.
And finally, Peter, putting you on the spot a bit, if there was any George Michael song you'd like me to play next, what would that be?
I think it's the Praying for Time one that I mentioned. I think the lyrics are really powerful. The music is, to me, hauntingly beautiful. I think it's a great track with a great social message. I mean, George was a pop star with a social conscience, and that's the way I want to remember him.
Peter Tatchell, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.